The little wizard was wearing the psychic equivalent of 3 feet of tempered steel, and it was being melted like butter under a blow lamp. It streamed away, vanished. If there were words to describe what happened to the wizard next, then they're imprisoned inside a wild thesaurus in the Unseen University Library. Perhaps it's best left to the imagination, except that everyone needed to imagine the kind of ship that Rincewind saw riding painfully for a few seconds before it mercifully vanished must be a candidate for the famous white canvas blazer with the optional long sleeves. So perish all enemies, said Abram. He turned his face up to the heights of the tower. I challenge, he said, and those who will not face me must follow me according to the law. There was a long, thick pause caused by a lot of people listening very hard. Eventually, from the top of the tower, a voice called out uncertainly, "Whereabouts in the lore?" "I embody the lore." There was a distant whispering, and then the same voice called out, "The law is dead! Sorcery is above the law!" The sentence ended in a scream because Abram raised his left hand and sent a thin beam of green light in the precise direction of the speaker. It was at about this moment that Rincewind realized that he could move his limbs himself. The hat had temporarily lost interest in him. He glanced sideways at Kunina. In instant unspoken agreement, they each grasped one of Nigel's arms and turned and ran, and didn't stop until they'd put several walls between them and the tower. Rincewind ran, expecting something to hit him in the back of the neck, possibly the world. All three landed in the rubble and lay there, panting. "You needn't have done that," muttered Nigel. "I was just getting ready to really give him a seeing to. How can I ever—" There was an explosion behind them and shafts of multicolored fire screamed overhead, striking sparks off the masonry. Then there was a sound like an enormous cork being pulled out of a small bottle and a peal of laughter that somehow wasn't very amusing. The ground shook. "What's going on?" said Kunina. "Magical war," said Rincewind. "Is that good?" "No." "But surely you want wizardry to triumph," said Nigel. Rincewind shrugged and ducked as something unseen and big whirred overhead, making a noise like a partridge. "I've never seen wizards fight," said Nigel. He started to scramble up the rubble and screamed as Kunina grabbed him by the leg. "I don't think that would be a good idea," she said. "Rincewind." The wizard shook his head gloomily and picked up a pebble. He tossed it up above the ruined wall, where it turned into a small blue teapot. It smashed when it hit the ground. "The spells react with one another," he said. "There's no telling what they'll do." "But we're safe behind this wall," said Kunina. Rincewind brightened a bit. "Are we?" he said. "I was asking you." "Oh, no, I shouldn't think so. It's just ordinary stone. The right spell and... Phooey!" "Phooey? Right. Shall we run away again? It's worth a try." They made it to another upright wall a few seconds before a randomly spitting ball of yellow fire landed where they had been lying and turned the ground into something awful. The whole area around the tower was a tornado of sparkling air. "We need a plan," said Nigel. "We could try running again," said Rincewind. "That doesn't solve anything." "Solves most things," said Rincewind. "How far do we have to go to be safe?" said Kunina. Rincewind risked a look around the wall. "Interesting philosophical question," he said. "I've been a long way, and I've never been safe." Kunina sighed and stared at a pile of rubble nearby. She stared at it again. There was something odd there, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "I could rush at them," said Nigel, vaguely. He stared yearningly at Kunina's back. "Wouldn't work," said Rincewind. "Nothing works against magic, except stronger magic. And then the only thing that beats stronger magic is even stronger magic. And next thing you know..." "Phooey," suggested Nigel. "It happened before," said Rincewind. "Went on for thousands of years, until not a..." "Do you know what's odd about that heap of stone?" said Kunina. Rincewind glanced at it. He screwed up his eyes. "What?"
apart from the legs,
he said. It took several minutes to dig the Seraph out. He was still clutching a wine bottle, which was almost empty, and blinked at them all in vague recognition.
Powerful,
he said, and then after some effort added,
stuff. This vintage felt,
he continued,
as though the place fell on me.
it did.
said Rincewind.
Ah, that would be it then.
Creosote focused on Kunina after several attempts and rocked backwards.
My word,
He said,
the young lady again. Very impressive.
I say,
Nigel began,
Your hair
said the Seraph, rocking slowly forward again.
is like a flock of goats that graze upon the side of Mount Gibra.
look here.
Your breasts are like.
The Seraph swayed sideways a little and gave a brief sorrowful glance at the empty bottle.
Are like the jeweled melons in the fabled gardens of dawn.
Kunina's eyes widened. They are, she said,
No
said the Seraph.
doubt about it. I know jeweled melons when I see them, as the white does in the meadows of the water margin on your thighs, which,
Excuse me.
said Nigel, clearing his throat with malice aforethought. Creosote swayed in his direction. He said,
Where I come from,
said Nigel stonily.
we don't talk to ladies like that.
Kunina sighed as Nigel shuffled protectively in front of her. It was, she reflected, absolutely true.
In fact,
He went on, sticking out his jaw as far as possible, which still made it appear like a dimple.
I've a jolly good mind, open to debate.
Said Rincewind, stepping forward.
Sire, we need to get out. I suppose you wouldn't know the way?
thousands of rooms
Said the Seraph.
in here. You know, not been out in years.
He hiccuped.
Decades. Eons. Never been out, in fact.
His face glazed over in the act of composition.
The bird of time has but a little way to walk and love. The bird is on its feet.
It's a geese.
Muttered Rincewind. Creosote swayed at him.
Abram does all the ruling, you see. Terrible hard work.
He's not,
Said Rincewind.
making a very good job of it just at present. And we'd sort of like to get away.
Said Kunina, who was still turning over the phrase about the goats.
And I've got this geese.
Said Nigel, glaring at Rincewind. Creosote patted him on the arm.
That's nice.
He said,
Everyone should have a pet.
So if you happen to know if you own any stables or anything,
prompted Rincewind.
Hundreds.
Said Creosote.
I own some of the finest horses in the world.
His brow wrinkled.
So they tell me.
but you wouldn't happen to know where they are?
Not as such.
The Seraph admitted. A random spray of magic turned the nearby wall into arsenic meringue.
I think we might have been better off in a snake pit.
Said Rincewind, turning away. Creosote took another sorrowful glance at his empty wine bottle.
I know where there's a magic carpet.
He said.
No,
Said Rincewind, raising his hands protectively.
absolutely not. Don't even...
It belonged to my grandfather.
A real magic carpet.
Said Nigel.
Listen,
Said Rincewind urgently.
I get vertigo just listening to tall stories.
Oh, quite
The Seraph burped gently.
genuine. Very pretty pattern.
He squinted at the bottle again and sighed.
It was a lovely blue color.
He added,
And you wouldn't happen to know where it is?
said Kunina slowly, in the manner of one creeping up very carefully to a wild animal that might take fright at any moment.
In the treasury. I know the way there. I'm extremely rich, you know. So they tell me.
He lowered his voice and tried to wink at Kunina, eventually managing it with both eyes.
We could sit on it.
he said, breaking into a sweat.
And you could tell me a story?
Rincewind tried to scream through gritted teeth. His ankles were already beginning to sweat.
I'm not going to ride on a magic carpet, he hissed. I'm afraid of grounds.
You mean heights, said Kunina. Stop being silly.
I know what I mean. It's the grounds that kill you.
The Battle of Al-Khali was a hammer-headed cloud in whose roiling depths weird ships could be heard and strange sounds were seen. Occasionally, mists seared across the sky. Where they landed, things were different. A large part of the soak had turned into an impenetrable forest of giant yellow mushrooms. No one knew what effect this had on its inhabitants, although possibly they hadn't noticed. The temple of Offler, the crocodile god, patron deity of the city, was now a rather ugly, sugary thing constructed in 5 dimensions. But this was no problem because it was being eaten by a herd of giant ants. On the other hand, not many people were left to appreciate this statement against uncontrolled civic alteration, because most of them were running for their lives. They fled across the fertile fields in a steady stream. Some had taken to boats, but this method of escape had ceased, and most of the harbour area turned into a swamp in which, for no obvious reason, a couple of small pink elephants were building a nest. Down below the panic on the roads, the luggage paddled slowly up one of the reed-lined drainage ditches. A little way ahead of it, a moving wave of small alligators, rats, and snapping turtles was pouring out of the water and scrambling frantically up the bank, propelled by some vague but absolutely accurate animal instinct. The luggage's lid was set in an expression of grim determination. It didn't want much out of the world, except for the total extinction of every other life form. But what it needed more than anything else now was its owner. It was easy to see that the room was a treasury by its incredible emptiness. Doors hung off hooks, barred alcoves had been smashed in, lots of smashed chests lay around, and this gave Rincewind a pang of guilt, and he wondered for about 2 seconds where the luggage had got to. There was a respectful silence, as there always is when large sums of money have just passed away. Nigel wandered off and prodded some of the chests in a forlorn search for secret drawers, as per the instructions in Chapter 11. Kunina reached down and picked up a small copper coin.
How horrible, said Rincewind eventually. A treasury with no treasure in it.
The seraph stood and beamed.
Not to worry,
he said. But all your money has been stolen, said Kunina.
The servants, I expect,
said Creosote.
Very disloyal of them.
Rincewind gave him an odd look.
Doesn't it worry you?
Not much. I never really spent anything. I've often wondered what being poor was like.
You're going to get a huge opportunity to find out.
Will I need training?
It comes naturally, said Rincewind. You pick up as you go along.
There was a distant explosion. Part of the ceiling turned to jelly.
Excuse me,
said Nigel.
This carpet?
Yes, said Kunina. The carpet. Creosote gave them a benevolent, slightly tipsy smile.
Ah, yes, the carpet. Push the nose of the statue behind you. Peach buttocked jewel of the desert dog.
Kunina, blushing, avoided this act of minor sacrilege on a large green statue of Offler the crocodile god. Nothing happened. Secret compartments assiduously failed to open.
Try the left hand.
She gave it an experimental twist. Creosote scratched his head.
Maybe it was the right hand.
I should try and remember if I were you, said Kunina sharply, when that didn't work either. There aren't many bits left that I care to pull.
What's that thing there?
Said Rincewind. You're really going to hear about it if it isn't the tail, said Kunina, and gave it a kick. There was a distant metallic groaning noise, like a saucepan in pain. The statue shuddered. It was followed by a few heavy clonks somewhere inside the wall, and Offler the crocodile god grated ponderously aside. There was a tunnel behind him.
My grandfather had this built for our more interesting treasure,
said Creosote.
it was very
He groped for a word.
ingenious.
If you think I'm setting foot in there,
Rincewind began.
stand aside,
Said Nigel loftily.
I will go first.
They could be traps, said Kunina doubtfully. She shot the syrup a glance.
Oh, probably. Oh, gazelle of heaven.
He said.
I haven't been in there since I was 6. There were some slabs you shouldn't tread on, I think.
Don't worry about that,
Said Nigel, peering into the gloom of the tunnel.
I shouldn't think there's a booby trap that I couldn't spot. Had a lot of experience in this sort of thing, have you?
Said Rincewind sourly.
Well, I know chapter 14 off by heart. It had illustrations.
Said Nigel, and ducked into the shadows. They waited for several minutes, in what would have been a horrified hush if it wasn't for the muffled grunts and occasional thumping noises from the tunnel. Eventually, Nigel's voice echoed back down to them from a distance.
There's absolutely nothing,
He said.
I've tried everything. It's as steady as a rock. Everything must have seized up by something.
Rincewind and Kunina exchanged glances. He doesn't know the first thing about traps, she said. When I was 5, my father made me walk all the way down a passage that he had rigged up, just to teach me.
He got through, didn't he?
Said Rincewind. There was a noise like a down, but amplified 1 billion times, and the floor shook.
Anyway, we haven't got a lot of choice,
He added, and ducked into the tunnel. The others followed him. Many people who had got to know Rincewind had come to treat him as a sort of two-legged miner's canary.
All right, but you've got the general idea.
I tended to assume that if Rincewind was still upright and not actually running, then some hope remained.
This is fun,
Said Creosote.
me robbing my own treasury. If I catch myself, I can have myself flung into the snake pit.
but you could throw yourself on your mercy.
Said Kunina, running a paranoid eye over the dusty stonework.
Oh, no, I think I would have to teach me a lesson as an example to myself.
There was a little click above them. A small slab slid aside, and a rusty metal hook descended slowly and jerkily. Another bar creaked out of the wall and tapped Rincewind on the shoulder. As he swung around, the first hook hung a yellowing notice on his back and retracted into the roof.
What did it do? What did it do?
Screamed Rincewind, trying to read his own shoulder blades.
It says, kick me.
Said Kunina. A section of wall slid up beside the petrified wizard. A large boot on the end of a complicated series of metal joints gave a half-hearted wobble, and then the whole thing snapped at the knee. The three of them looked at it in silence. Then Kunina said,
We're dealing here with a warped brain, I can tell.
Rincewind gingerly unhooked the sign and let it drop. Kunina pushed past him and stalked along the passage with an air of angry caution. And when a metal hand extended itself on a spring and waggled in a friendly fashion, she didn't shake it, but instead traced its molten wiring to a couple of corroded electrodes in a big glass jar.
Your granddad was a man with a sense of humour,
She said.
Oh yes, always liked the chuckle.
Said Creosote.
Oh, good.
Said Kunina. She prodded gingerly at a flagstone which, to Rincewind, looked no different to any of its fellows. With a sad little springy noise, a molting feathered duster wobbled out of the wall at armpit height.
I think I would have quite liked to meet the old Seraph,
She said, through gritted teeth.
although not to shake him by the hand. You better give me a leg up here, wizard.
Pardon? Kunina pointed irritably to a half-open stone doorway just ahead of them.
I want to look up there, she said. You just put your hands together for me to stand on, right? How do you manage to be so useless? Being useful always gets me into trouble,
Muttered Rincewind, trying to ignore the warm flesh brushing against his nose. He could hear her rooting around above the door. I thought so, she said.
What is it? Fiendishly sharp spears poised to drop? No. Spiked grill ready to skewer? It's a bucket,
said Kunina flatly, giving it a push.
What? Of scalding, poisonous whitewash. Just a lot of old dried up whitewash. Kunina jumped down.
That's grandfather for you, said Creosote. Never a dull moment.
Well, I've just about had enough, Kunina said firmly and pointed to the far end of the tunnel. Come on, you two. They were about 3 feet from the far end when Rincewind felt a movement in the air above him. Kunina struck him in the small of the back, shoving him forward into the room beyond. He rolled when he hit the floor, and something nicked his foot at the same time as a loud thump deafened him. The entire roof, a huge block of stone 4 feet thick, had dropped into the tunnel. Rincewind crawled forward through the dust clouds and, with a trembling finger, traced the lettering on the side of the slab. Laugh this one off, he said. He sat back.
That's Grandad, said Creosote happily. Always
He intercepted Kunina's gaze, which had the force of a lead pipe, and wisely shut up. Nigel emerged from the clouds, coughing. I say, what happened? He said. Is everyone all right? It didn't do that when I went through. Rincewind sought for a reply and couldn't find anything better than, didn't it? Light filtered into the deep room from tiny barred windows up near the roof. There was no way out except by walking through the several hundred tons of stone that blocked the tunnel, or, to put it in another way, which was the way Rincewind put it, they were undoubtedly trapped. He relaxed a bit. At least there was no mistaking the magic carpet. It lay rolled up on a raised slab in the middle of the room. Next to it was a small sleek oil lamp, and Rincewind craned to see a small gold ring. He groaned. A big offering corona hung over all three items, indicating that they were magical. When Kunina unrolled the carpet, a number of small objects tumbled onto the floor, including a brass herring, a wooden ear, a few large square sequins, and a lead box with a preserved soap bubble in it. What on earth are they? Said Nigel. Well, said Rincewind, before they tried to eat that carpet, they were probably moths. Gosh, that's what you people never understand, said Rincewind wearily. You think magic is just something you can pick up and use, like a parsnip, said Nigel.
Wine bottle,
said the serf. Something like that, said Rincewind cautiously, but rallied somewhat and went on. But the truth is not like that.
More like a wine bottle,
said the serf hopefully. Magic uses people, said Rincewind hurriedly. It affects you as much as you affect it, sort of thing. You can't mess around with magical things without it affecting you. I just thought I'd better warn you.
Like a wine bottle,
said Creosote.
That
drinks you back, said Rincewind.
Well, I have to go return leather, so I'm gonna stop the stream. Goodbye.